In this video, we're going to discuss one of the most important elements that you need to keep in mind in order to start a successful staffing agency. Hey, what's up YouTube? It's Natasha, the business recruiter. Welcome back to my channel. So when it comes to starting a staffing agency, it's important to keep in mind that one of the most important things that you need to understand from the very beginning is how you're going to price yourself. And this is because the staffing agency model does require a lot more elements than, let's say, a recruiting agency model in terms of how you actually go about pricing. Now, if you're not familiar with a staffing agency and ultimately what they do, a staffing agency is really focused on temporary work. So unlike a recruiting agency that's focused on direct or permanent placements, a staffing agency is going to be focused on placing employees at an organization or with one of your clients for a temporary amount of time. Now, that amount of time can be limited. It could be a couple weeks or it could also be a couple months. Again, in regards to ultimately what that time frame is going to look like, it's going to be an element that'll be a part of the negotiation process with your client. Now, with that being stated, the pricing in terms of how you actually go about making money with the staffing agency does look different in comparison to a recruiting agency. A recruiting agency is going to be focused on placement fees, meaning that it's going to be focused on having a set percentage that then you'll be able to earn as a result of that employee's first year's earnings. However, on the staffing agency side, you have to keep a couple different factors into consideration. And typically within the industry, this is called your bill rate. So if you're not familiar with what a bill rate is essentially the amount that a company pays to a staffing agency for their services in regards to being able to leverage temporary staff or employees. And when you're thinking about that bill rate, there's a couple different components that are associated with it. Number one is actually going to be the pay rate. And the pay rate is actually associated with the money that you would be paying that employee in order to do that temporary work. So think of this in terms of the direct pay that you're paying your temporary employee. The next thing is going to be your statutory expenses. And these are things that ultimately are not going to change, meaning that you have to pay these no matter what. And a lot of times what falls into this category is going to be taxes and insurance. So this is going to include those things that you have to pay at both a federal and state level, such as workers' compensation, federal unemployment taxes, Social Security and Medicare taxes, as well as any state unemployment insurance taxes. So these are things at the end of the day that ultimately you cannot change them. This is why they're considered to be statutory expenses. But the next component of your bill rate is going to be your gross margin. And your gross margin is going to be leveraged in order to cover any overhead costs as well as account for the profit that you're going to make from the deal with your client in terms of them being able to leverage temporary employees at their organization. Essentially, this is the amount of money that the staffing agency is going to be able to keep after you've accounted for all of your statutory expenses as well as the direct pay that's associated with you paying that employee. Now, if you're enjoying this video so far, then be sure to go down below and hit that subscribe button as well as that bell so that you can get notified of all of my videos that do drop weekly. So to recap, we've talked about the bill rate that's associated with the staffing agency and the three major components: the pay rate, the statutory expenses, and the gross margin. Now, when it comes to you actually determining how you're going to get paid, this is where the markup rate comes into play in regards to your staffing agency. And that markup rate is ultimately what you're going to charge to your client in order for you to be able to, one, cover the statutory expenses, but two, be able to make a profit. Now, when you think about a recruiting agency, permanent markups or placement fees are what you're after. And those placement fees can be anywhere from 10 to 40%, and that ultimately means you getting a percentage of that employee's first year earnings. Now, when you're talking about a staffing agency, the markup is actually going to be associated, the markup rate is going to be directly associated with your gross margin, meaning how much are you making per hour for those temporary workers. employees. Now, this is why it's important to understand that the name of the game in terms of staffing really is associated with volume. The more temporary employees that you have, the better off you'll be in terms of the profit that you're going to be able to turn. The average markup rate associated on the staffing side can be anywhere from 50% to 75%, contingent on the type of roles that you're looking to fill. And just like on the recruiting agency side, you can also negotiate what your markup rate is with your client. To ensure that you're getting compensated fairly, you want to make sure that you understand all of the elements of the contract that you're going to put in place to determine if the markup rate is actually going to be advantageous for you from a gross margin perspective. Meaning, you want to understand how long the contract is going to be in place, how many employees are ultimately going to be needed, how many hours are they going to be working. That way you can calculate what your expected gross profit is going to be associated with that particular contract. Now again, being able to operate a staffing agency requires a lot of different components, but understanding bill rates and markups is going to be pivotal to your success in regards to being able to operate your staffing agency effectively. If you want to learn more about staffing agencies and ultimately tips, tricks, and tools that you should take into consideration as you're getting yours off of the ground, then be sure to comment staffing down below and I'll be sure to create some more videos in regards to the staffing agency. Well, that is it for this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, then be sure to give me a thumbs up. As well as if you're not in my Facebook group, then I encourage you to join because we are still in there talking all things recruiting. I'll be sure to leave that link down below in the description box. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video.